Pleasure to meet you all at the 2021 online lecture series. Welcome. This is Subin Cho, a project consultant of the Preparatory Office for WIPIC, the International Center for the Interpretation and Presentation of World Heritage Sites. Pleasure to meet you all at the 2021 online lecture series on Understanding World Heritage Interpretation and Presentation. The 2021 WIPIC online lecture series has been held once a month since last April. Starting with Professor Mario Centeni's lecture, we had lectures with President Alberto Galandini, Professor Maria Gregory Burbis, Dr. Hafizur Rahman, Professor Mike Robinson, and Dr. Sarah Court. Today, we are going to have a lecture with Professor Elisa Giaccardi. The previous lectures' videos are uploaded on our YouTube and Facebook. We hope the online lecture series with our lecturers were inspiring and insightful for you. In November, there will be a special discussion on World Heritage Interpretation and Presentation with Professor Neil Silberman and Professor Mario Santana Quintero. For a more communicative, inclusive, and sustainable World Heritage interpretation and presentation, we need your active cooperation. Please leave your opinions and questions about the lectures and World Heritage issues on our live streaming videos, as we have time for questions after having lectures. Even after the lectures, please feel free to leave comments or send messages to us through our social media. Now, before we start today's lecture, I would like to introduce our lecturer, Professor Elisa Giaccardi. Elisa Giaccardi is professor in interaction design at Delft University of Technology, the Netherlands. She is the editor of Heritage and Social Media, in which she uses heritage as a lens to understand the impact of social media on the emergence and grounding of participatory values and practices. Her research in social media, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence reflects a persistent concern with designing as a shared process of cultivation and management of opportunity spaces. She is the director of MSc Design for Interaction at the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering. She is also founding member of ITEC, the Delft University of Technology campus-wide initiative for responsible design and engineering of AI systems, and coordinator of European Innovative Training Network, DECODE, on designing for and with AI. Now, let's start today's lecture. A great pleasure to meet you, Professor.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. It's a real pleasure and an honor really to speak today at the WIPIC online lecture series and to venture into the uncharted territories of data technology and participatory heritage practices. I will try to illuminate the shifts, but also the frictions and the future opportunities that I believe it is important to engage for inclusive and sustainable heritage futures. But before we get into all this, I would like you to know a little bit more about where I come from, scholarly, but also personally. I'm a design researcher, and over the last 2 decades, my work has focused on the challenges that a digital transformation of society poses to the field of design. From early digital networks to social media, from the Internet of Things to artificial intelligence, as mentioned in the introduction, my research reflects this concern with approaching design as this shared space for cultivating opportunities for new type of relations and the emergence of shared values. And the transformative role that technology is increasingly playing into this, and what role could it play? Research in heritage practice for me begins in the early 2000s with the design of a social media platform for capturing and sharing sonic experiences of natural heritage in collaboration with the City of Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks in Colorado. This interest in unofficial heritage practices as an expression of what at the time scholars refer to as participatory culture grows and materializes in the editing volume on heritage and social media that was published by Routledge in 2012. In 2017, it sort of completes a cycle with the publication, together with Lideke Platte, of this open access chapter on heritage and the Internet of Things, in which we reflect through examples on the implications for heritage practice of the emergent capacity of the Internet, not just to allow users to generate content, but to connect that content to objects in the physical world, so that material objects could be connected to online databases, collect and exchange data. And since moving to TU Delft, I returned to broader matters of interaction design and data technology, and I'm currently leading the European Decode Network, which is a research and training program aimed to rethink design and develop fundamentally new design competencies to guide society's digital transformation towards inclusive and sustainable futures. What's also important for you to know, to position what I'm going to say, is that I share an expansive understanding of culture that's grounded in the everyday. The work of heritage scholars such as Susie West, Laura James Smith, and Neil Silberman helped us see through their cases that heritage is more about the cultural work of ordinary people than official heritage lists. Scholars such as Thomas, Lowenthal, and Byrne helped us understand that we socially construct heritage in the context of our own lives and imaginations to interact meaningfully with our past, and through that shape our vision of the future. This fundamental understanding emphasizes that heritage meanings and values are the results of repeated and ongoing interactions in the lived world of ordinary people. And now that you know a bit more about where I come from, how I'm situated, let me give you an overview. The lecture is structured in 3 parts and makes use of examples to render the arguments more tangible. I will start with reviewing participatory uses of data technology in human practices of remembering. And then I will problematize how practices of remembering between humans and algorithms are currently performed. And we'll conclude by illuminating a possible roadmap, a set of trajectories, design spaces for imagining inclusive and sustainable heritage futures. The underlying arguments that I'm making with each of these parts is, first, that heritage practice is inherently post-human. 2, that for AI to be culturally aware is not enough. And 3, that designers should sit at the table of cultural AI and future initiatives in the field of heritage and data technology to provide an understanding of how we craft or might be crafting these relations. So let's start the first part of the talk and reviewing with reviewing data technology in human practices of remembering. There are three main shifts, all happened in the last decade, really very close to each other. Shifts in how heritage gets to be understood and practiced through digital means. And I'd like to associate these shifts to subsequent waves of data technology in society, social media, the Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. These shifts are qualitatively different from a participatory heritage perspective, but technologically, infrastructurally, cumulative. The example that I'm going to provide to illustrate these shifts range from cases of grassroots heritage to new exhibition formats to public interventions in the city, and represent a phase of experimentation. They are early examples that I hope will help illustrate the change in modalities, but also in aspirations that data technologies has brought to our understanding of participatory heritage, imagination, and its practices. The first shift is produced by the advent of social media and the ability for users to generate and exchange digital content across digital networks, what we refer to as user-generated content. This has contributed to challenge ideas of authority in heritage interpretation, opening matters of heritage to decentralized publics across the globe. One early example of this change in values is the commemoration of the Bhopal disaster. The case concerns online practices of remembering together the deadly gas leak that took place in a Union Carbide plant in the city of Bhopal. As described by Sophia Liu, the annual commemoration of the Bhopal disaster constitutes a process of socially distributed curation of personal accounts, past and present images, and documented political actions through which counter-narratives are created that contribute to the historical memory of the event, bringing together Bhopalis with other Indians as well as people worldwide. Another early example is the exhibition project Digital Natives, in which youngsters born with digital technologies were asked to represent themselves and the things they value for future generations by means of social media content such as music playlists. The installation itself uses and mimics the language of social media to create hybrid and living connections between the exhibition subjects and audiences' everyday lives. For example, the interactive installation in this picture enabled visitors to gain first-hand experience with the remix and mashup cultures that are hallmarks of the new digital generations. Each cube represented one person's musical taste. And by placing more musical cubes on the table and applying effects to them dynamically, the visitor could combine and alter loops and create complex mashups. So framed within the language and experience of social media, each experience is created in unique moments of dialogue and interaction inside the actual exhibition space. The second shift was brought about by the Internet of Things just a few years later. As beautifully phrased by Chris Speed, unlike the adage, rolling stone gather no moss, objects now gather moss. As they move from one place to the next, they gather locative data about where they have been. As people interact with them, they gather social data. And even as they sit idly on a shelf, they might be gathering data about the objects that are around them. This has contributed to bring user-generated content and digitally mediated forms of participatory heritage interpretation back to the situated and embodied contexts where things actually come to matter. One early example is Tales of Things, in which people could attach to their mundane possessions memories to share with others in the form of a textual narrative, a photographic image, or a video. Developed in collaboration with the Oxfam charity shop in the student quarter of Manchester, the project used the properties of connected objects to offer the community alternative pasts. Another early example is the Moving People Guerrilla Street Art project by Dutch artists collective Power of Art. In the fall of 2015, the artist collective placed 10,010 miniatures of refugees in various public spaces in Amsterdam and The Hague. The miniatures were modeled onto the 3D scan of real refugees with a web address printed on each of them. The project aimed to encourage empathy and strengthen social cohesion. To this end, the miniatures in the street allowed those who stumbled upon them to suddenly encounter the personal memories and stories of the refugee associated to the replica. The most recent shift is being produced by the permeating use of machine learning and artificial intelligence in a much broader subset of everyday life. The use of algorithms and social media platforms and across Internet of Things infrastructures has given, let's say, agency to things, allowing them to accrue memories of their own and share them somehow autonomously. And this will contribute to further promote unofficial histories, possibly, and to shaping futures that are probabilistic in nature. But because we'll dive into how this works in a few slides, I want to give you here a couple of examples, early speculative examples, as an imaginative counterpart to existing applications, to the ones that we're going to see in a moment. The first example is Photobox, a domestic technology that was conceptualized way before we had many of our apps, to print 4 or 5 randomly selected photos from the owner's Flickr at the time collection at random intervals each month inside a wooden chest. The difference between Photobox and Facebook today is that Photobox was meant to be slow. Its reasoning was meant to contest accelerated rates of photo accumulation and to facilitate reflection to help find meaning. Another similar speculative example is Memento, Memento was conceptualized to rummage in its owner's photo stream and print out pictures that are discarded or somehow forgotten. These might be pictures that turned out blurred or are otherwise, quote unquote, imperfect from a compositional standpoint, like the close-up selfies secretly taken with the smartphone by your toddler in a moment of distraction, and that would otherwise just be discarded as an accident. Here again, the difference between Memento and Google Photos conceptually is that Memento was meant to open our probabilistic future to a plurality of possible interpretations and meanings. Its reasoning in choosing imperfect photos was meant to contest algorithmic and profit-driven forms of legitimization of what constitutes an acceptable history. So before we move to discussing the frictions and perils that hide into the promise of artificial intelligence, I want to conclude this first part, this brief overview, by arguing that there is a clear need for expanding our understanding and crafting of participation in heritage interpretation to non-human actors. The things that we produce online or encounter in real life are now powered by data technology, and because of that, they take part in how we read the past and write the future in ways that previous aide-memoire did not. If we do not acknowledge their somehow autonomous behavior and conceptualize heritage participation in posthuman terms, we risk to miss on the opportunity to broaden our understanding of the past and open to more inclusive and sustainable multiple futures. But we also risk to leave posthuman practices of remembering together and the collective making of history, if not reality, to corporations and wayward ideologies. So if we now take a remove from this idea that heritage is a posthuman practice centered around participation, around entangled practices of remembering between humans and non-humans, what are the critical questions that we should ask? How do we begin to understand and perform next to algorithms? Not as, and that's why before I was always saying sort of, not as autonomous technical forces completely independent, but rather as put clearly by Nick Siever in his writing, but rather as an heterogeneous social technical systems of which we are part too. So I have distilled here 3 questions that I deem critical. The first question we should ask is, to what purpose does the thing, the algorithm that powers it, remember? And I will use here the concept of avidity to explore the logics through which algorithmic systems know and intervene upon their users to make recommendations and shape memories. The second question we should ask is, for whom does the thing, the algorithm, recollect? And here I would refer to the concept of infrastructural politics to point to the increasing delegation of meaning, control and profit to algorithmic systems. And finally, the third question to ask is, how does the algorithm relate? And here we'll touch upon issues of negotiations of power and how these are or are not facilitated by design. I will use algorithmic memories as an example and refer to well-known Facebook features such as on this day, friendiversary, recaps of memories, year in review, and similar features by Google and Apple to illustrate these abstract concepts and hopefully make them tangible, a bit more palpable. Now, Facebook, Google, Apple, and several others offer past-oriented services of algorithmic memory. These services review, interpret, and present the past that is archived in your social media, posts, and interactions on behalf of the user. As explained in Lee, the archived past comes to the users and evokes memory practices without having to make an effort to review one's post archived in social media or mobile devices. And though that curatorial support might seem nice, we need to ask, to what purpose do these algorithms remember? And the purpose is to stimulate your avidity and increase your engagement. That is the time spent on social media or on your mobile. That is your exposure to profiling and advertising. And what is our avidity about when we look back at our past? To see when we were happy, to nostalgically remember happy moments, to think that our life, our past is a happy one, reconciled. As a result, our collective sense of the past is becoming standardized. Photos, as you can see, of the frontal face with opened eyes and smiling is always algorithmically chosen over other experiences and processed as a memory for our future retrievals. But does the algorithm recollect for me? Does the algorithm care about our understanding of the past or the future that we will be shaping based on those interpretations? As part of social technical infrastructures, algorithms are agents of power. And when there is power, there is politics. There is an engine, pressure points at work to establish preferred paths and points of connection. In addition to assessing facial expressions, Facebook August 2015 patent, as pointed out in Lee, also proposes to collect and analyze users' actions such as liking and reacting to posts, making and unmaking friends, posting photos, and leaving comments. As argued in Lee, today's algorithmic memory practices make human emotions and memories part of the observable actions, which can be mathematically modeled, measured, and analyzed to automate and monetize nostalgia. So now the question is, can these algorithmic logics be put to service of other politics? Can they be part of other infrastructures? And the question to me is not so much whether we can ethically, culturally align algorithm by defining metrics that predetermine, legitimize what and how we could remember, and go back to official heritage registers for the everyday. For me, the question is rather, how do we negotiate our differences? How do we create new paths, new points of connection? But the path recalled by Facebook to us is not necessarily authentic. It's ideologically utopian. Our relationship today to this past and the algorithms that create it is not negotiable. For example, for the Facebook's year in review, Facebook categorizes users' posts based on positive words to create a taxonomy of memory themes and inform their ranking algorithms on what memories to select and recirculate, as you can see from these images cited in Lee. The only power users are given are options to customize what will appear in the Facebook year in review video. So that's quite a trajectory from the initial less algorithmically curated user-generated content and folksonomies that we had on Web 2.0 architectures. And as we move into using more and more algorithms and artificial intelligence for even in the heritage sector, for better understanding museum audiences and better interpreting our past, we will need to be critical. Post-human practices of participatory heritage will require new design competencies to anthropologically and culturally reconcile human values and algorithmic logics. But though we need to be vigilant, there's no determinism. Like other aspects of culture, algorithms are unstable. And as argued by Seaver, culturally enacted by the practices people use to engage with them. So at this point, I'd like to start using the participatory term more than human rather than post-human, because we're still very much in the picture. And reflect with you on how to design for these unstable, probabilistic co-performances between humans and non-humans in participatory practices of remembering. And here in this last part of the talk, I like to shift the attention from criticalities to creativities, to the imagination that at least I, as a designer, feel responsible for offering as a space of cultivation of new opportunities. So this last part of my talk is not about what we should be cautious about, what we should be standing against, but what we might be standing for. What trajectories, what design spaces we should pursue if we want to move beyond the limitations of traditional understandings of heritage practice in the application of AI to the cultural and heritage sector. How can we make the next step? How can we uphold to those ideas of participation as we move forward in using these more sophisticated technologies? In this last part of my talk, I will use again 3 projects, really important, really relevant ones, and use them to explore possible design spaces, what we might be doing next and more, starting from there, to engage in more than human practices of participatory heritage interpretation. And I will touch on issues of political participation, ethical imagination, and infrastructural openness, topics that would, of course, require alone another lecture, but that again, I will try to bring down to earth, to make tangible by using existing examples as a springboard for reflection. The Social Bias Observatory, SABIE, is a project aimed to trace colonial terminology in museum collections through AI-powered automated analysis of collection descriptions. The goal is to detect the cultural bias in these collections and supplement existing collection data with this information without replacing them, just supplementing them. What would be the next step we would need to do here for a more than human practice of participatory heritage? That step would entail moving beyond the automated annotation of the bias in the past by placing the human in the loop of AI interpretation and contrasting human and non-human perspectives, bringing them both to the table in relation to each other in the political work of heritage interpretation and meaning making. Time Machine, most of you might probably know it, it's a mass-scale research project promoted and funded by the European Commission, involving over 200 organizations from 33 European countries. In this project, the AI will be trained to collect and analyze data from a wide variety of temporal and geographical areas. It will identify and aggregate documents, artifacts, monuments, and other fragmented historical data sets according to their similarities. The goal here is to provide access to a more comprehensive narrative of European past and foster collaboration around the pan-European challenges of today. What could we do here? What would be the design space for a more than human practice of participatory heritage? It would entail an ethical imagination that moves beyond the territorialization and ritualization of history. A practice that brings together and contrasts again human and non-human perspectives alike with the goal of fostering diversity of interpretations as well as reconciliations, and develop shared understandings of the emerging narrative produced by AI. In other words, a practice that entails, in Claire Colebrook's words, the crafting of relations that cut into the territory and take us elsewhere, rather than the project of saving us from all our threatens, from all what threatens our emergent complexity. And finally, AI Cult is a project in collaboration with the National Library of the Netherlands and Sound Vision, focused on automated analysis and enrichment of object descriptions in museum collections using AI, from medieval manuscripts to radio, television, YouTube videos, podcasts, and games. Because of the inherent richness, subjectivity, and polyvocal nature of cultural heritage, researchers in AI Cult realize that data limits and often even rules out the responsible use of AI. And so the goal of the project is to explore ways in which heritage institutes can use AI in ways that align with their role in society as a trusted source of information by developing novel bias detection and filtering methods. The design space here, if we were to do a next step for a more than human practice of participatory heritage, if we were to uphold to those participatory principles, would entail connecting the infrastructural work of heritage interpretation in stewarding inclusive and sustainable futures, connecting that to people's everyday lives. That is to say, giving users an active role in creating stories and narratives from raw collection data in the context of their lives and their communities. So to conclude, while extraordinary work is underway to make good use of AI in cultural heritage, I'm glad to see these extraordinary efforts. We are just at the beginning of understanding how more than human practices of participatory heritage can be shaped between humans and algorithms to the benefit of mankind. Challenging territorializations of what is possible and worthwhile to remember, exploring the kind of unspoken and the aspects of liminality that can be brought to heritage interpretation by AI, enabling objects that are part of our lives to begin to speak in ways outside our habitus. All these prefigure new spaces of conversations and new scales for heritage practice, which set no boundaries or limits to what heritage can be and how it is to be intended in the broader cultural, political, and social context. But this requires rethinking our interactions, how these are crafted, how these are designed, our interactions with and through AI. And I believe design has an important role to play in this development and in future initiatives of cultural right and further applications of AI to the cultural sector. And with this final thought, I'd like to thank you all for listening. I look forward to your comments and to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your insightful lecture and also inspiring lecture on the World Heritage interpretation and media and design. And yeah, your lecture was really inspiring and really reminds us that we should not limit the discourse on World Heritage interpretation and presentation only to the professionals or the experts on the field, but as you've quoted in your lecture, yes, heritage meanings and values are the result of the repeated and ongoing interactions of in the lived world of ordinary people. So, yes, yeah, I totally agree with the quote that we should make the World Heritage interpretation and presentation. By using those, we should create and understand the values of World Heritage and also the heritage with all the public, not leaving anyone behind. So thank you for your insightful lecture. And well, there's our first question. So I will read it out. Here's the first question. The question is, how should the weak or the stakeholders in so-called the global south involved in the political engagement who have less material technology and professionals to survive in a society where algorithms and data are often governed or controlled by the global power and wealth? Yes, that was the question.
Yes, it's a really good question. I hope I had an answer to that. It is a fact, and it's not just in the global south. There are pockets in the world where it's really difficult to play any kind of active role in shaping a possible change. But the reality is that what we need is a fundamental rethinking. And that's at least my how I'm committing to finding an answer to that. We need a fundamental rethinking of the competencies that we we bring to how we shape these technologies. And these are design competencies, and that also means that we need to be able to regain some kind of leadership in shaping these futures. We need to be able to be anticipatory and not simply accountable. We need to be in places where we can be effective. So we need to understand and explore and experiment and prototype and rehearse new roles for designers in order for them to be effective in companies and organizations. When it comes to the global south, on a personal level, I just think it's important to have more and more participation from people that understand, they really understand what it is they were talking about. And so, for example, in the case of Decode, we made a really huge effort to reach out to students in those countries and bring them in with their own perspectives, with their own experiences, with their own pasts. And for me, that is already a way to start. But of course, there's much more than that. So I guess I'm going to stop here for now, because I don't, I think we could probably engage in a different type of conversation then.
Yes, thank you for your answer. Yes, not only the global south, but also the global north also have various problems on the field. So, yes, well, that is the role what international governments and NGOs should try to solve, try their best to solve those kind of problems. Yes, thank you for your answer. And we will move on to our second question. The question is, I think this is really new perspectives on heritage interpretation and something that we do need to think about at the moment. So it was super interesting lecture for me, and I would like to ask you what we heritage interpreters, whoever involved in heritage interpretation, should be cautious on in the sense of heritage interpretation with and through participatory media.
Yes, thank you for the question. What I meant with that is that I think it's important to be literate about how these technologies actually work. They're not just tools that we can use for our own purposes. These technologies have logics embedded into them. They are intrinsically biased. They have to be in order to function. So more than cautious, critical, fluent, literate about how the technology works, and critical in asking questions, always trying to pose the question of why is that particular what is really the goal, what is really the purpose of that technology when you look at it in an infrastructural context. what interest does it serve, and so on and so forth. So literacy and criticality.
Thank you for your answer. And well, here's our next question, so I will read it out. The first question was, the digital world is relatively new, but it is already highly politicized, with the powerful governments and private corporations having significant control over what and how information is spread. So how would you see this affecting the increasing involvement of heritage in the digital scape in the near future?
Super interesting, super good question. Personally, I think it is important to work with different actors and stakeholders, meaning with the governments rather than corporations. There are a lot of AI startups and a lot of AI researchers now in universities that would be really keen in helping develop different kinds of models, different kinds of applications, and I'm pausing because sometimes when I think about that, I get a little bit depressed. But I think I want to believe that we can create safe spaces of experimentation with different types of stakeholders, and then try to scale them up, try to see how, because it's not just the application that needs to be different, it's the whole social, cultural, and political setup, and that's not something you change, in a day. That's something that you need to work towards with baby steps, and working with the right people, creating the right safe space of experimentation, and then also publicly, debating and contrasting with some of the illuminated people in corporations. There's a lot going on. Also, when we think of this landscape of commercial actors and people that work and try to make a difference within those, and that are now advocating for safeguards for people that work in these companies, and voice different opinions that they are not going to get fired if that happens. So anyway, I think I jumped a little bit all over the place. It's a complicated answer, but I would say that my main answer is work with different stakeholders, experiment, try to scale it up. Government should play a bigger role.
Great, thank you for your
civil
answers.
society too, yeah.
Yeah, it's a complicated problem, and quite an interesting problem if it can be solved. And yeah, thank you for your answer. And we will move on to our next question. The question was, when there are conflicting memories in an ethical sense, for instance, the memory from the colonized and colonizing countries about painful past and dissonant memories, do you think the participatory media and from user-generated practices of remembering is able to judge which is right and which is wrong?
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, this is precisely the point I'm trying to make when I say, if we begin using AI for debiasing these histories, it's great because we're detecting where the biases are, but the AI cannot judge what is right and what is wrong, and just adding it as a metadata is not enough for us to deal with painful pasts and societies and memories, possibly reconciled. We need to understand the work of heritage has to be participatory, and so that we need to design and craft interactions around those insights and those narratives that are produced by AI, where we are in the loop. And I think that here the expertise of designers and of heritage practitioners on how to do that, on how to enable that in a sensible and meaningful way, needs to come into the conversation of these really huge projects where a lot of investment, technological investment has been made.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. And yes, there are really lots of issues that we have to take care of, such as ethical issues or the difference between the memories issues on the heritage field, especially on the word heritage interpretation and presentation area. So, well, AI and design will give a lot of help on this one, but we still have lots of things to develop. That things need to be developed. So yeah, maybe we can deal with the kind of issues in the future again and again. And yeah, if there are any further questions, please leave those on our comments and questions. And thank you for your answer. And yes, there's our next lecture. So next question. So I will send it to you. I will read it out. Yes, thank you. The question, this one is quite long. I will read it out. The question was, it seems that the algorithm has big potential in efficiently dealing with enormous memories, values, and stories associated to heritage. However, as you mentioned, it requires human engagement, which provides the primary sources and data. This tells what remains still despite the massive capacity and power of technology. Expression of people is essential in both old ways and new technology of working on heritage. But then I think the technology can make it much more accessible and enjoyable for people to express their stories and join in the process. What will be the things that should be kept in one's mind when trying to engage people using technology?
Yeah, it's a beautiful comment. I agree that there is the computational power and the data analytics power that then can also combine with the ability for technology making more accessible and enjoyable for people to express their stories. What to keep? I would say that in addition to accessibility and enjoyable is something that I would translate in design terms as user experience, that it's an enjoyable, meaningful experience. To keep in mind, particularly with these technologies, that we need to educate the technology. We probably because of industrialization, probably because of how how easy it is now to delegate a lot of our thinking and of our daily practices to this technology. We are really getting to that. We're getting to sit back and engage in a very passive relationship with technology, which is one of use and consumption. And so what we should keep in mind is, how do we activate and mobilize people when they use technology, when they engage and relate to technology? How do we help them understand that is also their responsibility to make the effort of training, educating the algorithm? And I know it's a difficult issue in terms of usability and user experience. We live very busy lives, and just think of how we deal with terms of service and cookie settings on a daily basis. There needs to be a way that we design these technologies that enable us to have a different kind of relation that's more active and that help us understand that this is a dialogue, and we're not just only on the recipient end.
Thank you for your answer, and I'm sure today we really had lots of interesting questions, but with complicated issues that we should keep it in our minds and heads when we are working on the field. So thank you for our participants' question, and thank you for your answer on it. And once again, genuinely appreciate your insightful and inspiring lecture with informative cases in your lecture. Thank you, Professor Elisa. And would you like to give your word before we end today's session?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to introduce these topics. Thank everyone for the questions and comments. I can see that we share a lot of interests and concerns, and maybe there is space for opening up a more sustained conversation around these topics so that we can actually produce impact and steer the development of these applications in the cultural field to the benefit also of other areas in the broader social, cultural, and also political context. So it's great to see.
Thank you. Thank you. And once again, it was a great honor to have you on the online lecture series for us. And thank you. And before we end today's event, I would like to introduce our next men's session. Well, next month, a special discussion on inclusive and participatory World Heritage interpretation and presentation with Professor Neil Silberman and Professor Mario Santana Quinter will be held. Further information on it, including the exact time, will be informed on our Facebook and Instagram. Well, just as I always mention in the beginning of all lectures, for a more communicative, inclusive, and participatory World Heritage interpretation and presentation, we need our participants' active cooperation. So do not forget to join the special discussion next month and leave your opinions and questions about the lectures and World Heritage issues, as we have time for questions on that day too. And thanks for joining us today, and see you next month. Dag.